Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. If you have a history buff, then I have a book for you. Today's book review is Uprising by Jennifer A. Nielsen. And you will notice if you've seen some of my other reviews that I have done many of Nielsen's novels before. I absolutely have enjoyed her nonfiction stories that are all generally war related. So she has some great stories out there. So she definitely does it again with another World War II story. This one is set in Warsaw, Poland, and Lydia Durr is the main character. And what distinguishes this book from some of her other ones is that this one is actually based on a true story. Lydia Durr was a real person during World War II. And so a little bit of the author's note relates to that, but there is some literary sort of license that she does use in here. And so she does mention that in her historical note or her author's note at the end. But this story is based on her and her life, and she does talk about that she hopes that she did justice in relaying her story to young readers. And in this story, Lydia is very stubborn. She's willful. At times, she's a bit foolish, but she's also incredibly brave, courageous, and talented. So, again, while this is historical fiction, it is based on her life. And so she was a very talented pianist. And so we see aspects of that throughout the story as the music is weaved in, and her desire to play is really cool. And at times that almost gets her in trouble and almost forfeits her life because of it. But again, she's really brave and courageous, and that definitely shines through in the story. And she lived in Warsaw in Poland during the Nazi occupation. And the story does span a huge time frame. So it opens up in September 1st, 1939, and it ends October 9th, 1944. And that's sort of unique in some of the novels that she's written, but also of the time period that she's giving a chronological take of her life and some of the events that take place. She does make Lydia younger in this book than she was in real life when some of these things were taking place. But again, that's sort of made clear. And some of that is to make sure that her novel really fits and appeals to a younger audience. So she starts out as just 12 years old. And shortly after the Germans begin to invade Poland, Lydia's father joins the Polish army, and he wants to defend against the Russians. So on one side, we have Russia coming in, and another side, Germany. At the time that this was taking place, they were allies. And so later in the novel, you do see where Russia is no longer allies with Germany. And so the Polish people are trying to figure out, like, can we trust them? Can we fight with them against the Germans? So it is a very confusing time. Her father did originally fight in World War I, and her mom and, of course, Lydia herself, they're very upset that he is rejoining the war effort in this regard. Her home is eventually taken over by German officers, and they are forced to leave their home, and they actually end up in a apartment that's, doesn't even have running water. So there's not even a bathroom inside. So they're going from extreme luxury to this, like, basically it's four walls and a roof. And it is an apartment, but it is right next to the Warsaw Ghetto. At one point, Nazi officers even come in and they board up the windows, and they are prohibited from looking out over into the ghetto area. Obviously, that's incredibly tempting, and she doesn't entirely listen to that. So they end up in this other apartment where they're actually staying with they have two Jewish women who are staying with them. One was originally their housemaid and her mother. So both are much older, and Lydia really cares for these women. And so it's really upsetting when she comes home one day and the women are gone. So the story unfolds is the tension not only between the Polish people and the German invasion, but there's also the tension between Lydia and her mother. Lydia's mother is quite critical of her throughout the novel, and she really is harsh in some of her criticism that leaves Lydia really feeling unloved. Fortunately, she does have a brother who is very encouraging and speaks life into her, and she knows that like he cares for her. But having her father gone, who she feels like she really connected with, and now left with her mother, who's constantly critical and talking about all the issues that she has because of Lydia. And so that is an aspect of the story. Unfortunately, you do find out in the story and early on, but it's repeated and brought up again, that there was a daughter who was born first before the brother, but she died when she was only 2. And later in the story, there is a little bit of reconciliation between Lydia and her mother, and the realization that her mother really closed her heart off after losing her first daughter. So when Lydia came along, it was like she almost couldn't bear to kind of let her in her heart. And so that is a reason for her mother's coldness. And like I said, there is some moments of a little bit of reconciliation in an attempt to kind of mend those bridges. Readers do not need to worry about any profanity or unsavory situations, but this is a World War II novel, so there are depictions and details pertaining to war and what was occurring during that time. Talk about the Jewish people being exterminated. We have extreme hunger, people being shot in the street, on site, those sorts of things. So those are in here. Not graphic, but they're in here. And so that does pertain to obviously the time period. Lydia does also struggle with her belief in God. Her family is Catholic, and you see her questioning one of the priests that she visits, and she asks, why doesn't God make Hitler die? So that's one of the quotes that she has in the story. So questions along these lines, I think, definitely exist when we're facing great evil. And definitely that's what's seen in the novel. I think that's a great question that she presents. And I think that's a great opportunity for families to come alongside and talk with their children about when these bad, evil things happen, where is God in the midst of that? Because that's a realistic struggle. So I really appreciate that aspect sort of being brought into the story, because it creates an opportunity for those conversations. So I would encourage you, if you have your child read this book, that may be a conversation that you want to have. There are a wonderful quotes in here, like the power of education and wanting to learn and standing up for yourself and defending those that you love. I really enjoyed this story. I had never heard about Lydia Dear before, so I'm definitely interested in learning a little bit more about her and her experience in Warsaw. I think it's just really important to hear those stories and to learn about what people did, because that bravery and courageous mentality is something that is important for us to read, but also remind ourselves that these were real people. They weren't just fictional, and we can learn and grow and have opportunities where we can be brave and courageous, and maybe not in the same way that Lydia had to be, but in small ways where we're facing our own fears and our own struggles. So again, if you are looking for a World War II story, you have a reader who loves history, I definitely recommend Uprising. Another benefit is it's also focusing on a female protagonist because of Lydia. And a lot of times we don't get those stories. We see a lot of World War II stories written from a male perspective. So really a great read for anyone. And I definitely recommend Jennifer Nielsen.